So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak about a project that I'm been working on for a few years and excited about, working with my collaborators, Danny Itkin and Gil Eschel from the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development in Israel, and also Om Gruvi from the Geological Society in Israel. And we are working on a modern soil survey of Israel. So Dr. Itkin, a couple of years ago, brought together a group of soil scientists to identify the soil priorities for Israel. They identify soil degradation due to intensive agricultural practices, irrigation water quality, changes associated with irrigation management, ensuring resilience to climate change, promoting nature-based agro-ecosystem services. And actually last year I went to a conference in Israel on precision sustainable agriculture. And I wasn't aware that, so according to the Israeli scientists, they feel like they're a decade or more behind the United States in terms of adapting sustainable agriculture practices. And look, from a soil science perspective, having some pretty severe erosion and soil degradation issues. So there's work to be done there, but I'll be focusing today on the revising pedology part. I'm guessing many people don't necessarily know what that word means. I'm a pedologist, which is a subdiscipline of soil science that looks at how and why soils vary in landscapes. And because we do that, we're often the ones that get involved with the soil mapping. So what is a soil survey? For the visual learners, you can see a picture of it there. So we draw polygons across landscapes, delineating different soils. And within each of those polygons, there's a wealth of information on physical, chemical, some biological properties, and then also interpretations for agricultural and really a wide spectrum of land uses in terms of whether they're suitable, the limitations you might find. So ultimately, so soil survey is an inventory of soil resources, showing the distribution of different types of soils. For some context, in the United States, we have over 25,000 different types of soils mapped. And we have this large data set that I mentioned already associated with these polygons. And the users are widespread, from individual landowners to watershed scale, national scale mapping. And in the United States, we kind of take it for granted, I think, in many ways, that if we are doing climate modeling or stormwater generation model prediction or anything related to agriculture, we can include a soils layer or those soil property layers within our GIS databases. Not true in Israel because there is no soil survey in Israel yet. And another thing, we've got a lot of land in the United States. Not that we want to waste it. Obviously, we want to take care of our land here. Israel's a small country, so it certainly seems to me that there's even a heightened reason to understand and what the soil resource is and manage it well, and part of that is having a survey of what's available. So soil survey in the United States is done through what's called the National Cooperative Soil Survey, led by the federal government with heavy partnerships from state, local, academic, and private institutions. We started back in the late 1800s, and we were up to 95% of our land area mapped. And so there's many different ways to access the data. One of the simplest is a web app called the Web Soil Survey, where any user in the world can go and put an address or a different location in the United States and generate a soil survey of their area of interest, and again, have this whole wealth of information available to them. Israel is fairly different. So Israel does have two old soil classification mapping systems, but they're both outdated and not used by anybody. So although there are these old national scale soil maps, they're, in terms of functionality, they're not used. So our initial stages of this project is we're working to adapt and update these previous maps to the US system, which I'll mention in a second, and also to advances in soil science. A lot has happened in the past 50 years in soil science that aren't represented in these maps. And long-term, the goal is to have a modern survey similar to what we have in the United States of Israel that's useful for agriculture and other land use decisions, also communication and education. So in June 2022, the Israeli Soil Science Society voted to replace these two older systems with the US system of classification, which is vaguely called soil taxonomy. And so part of the, I'm gonna get into all this story, but apparently that one of these systems was more for the academics in Israel and one was for the non-academics. So it's good that they got together and decided to just toss those old ones out and adopt this. Like the US system is an international system, so it is appropriate, and it's being constantly improved. And part of this work, they decided to hire one of my co-authors, Dr. Danny Itkin, as a postdoc, who is the lead person on this project, and also was voted to be an associate assistant professor in my department here at the University of Maryland in environmental science and technology. So a little about the soils. So this is a initial soil map, still work to be done on this, but just to give you some idea of the variation of soils in Israel. Soil taxonomy is a hierarchical system. There's six levels in the classification system. The highest level is called the order. There are 12 soil orders, and 7 of those are represented in Israel. So quite a bit of diversity for a relatively small area. And the second level of the taxonomic system really deals with soil climate, soil moisture and soil temperature. And I wanted to mention this one in particular because I know there's a lot of people that do water in this room. And there are, as far as we know, the group I'm working with, very little soil water content data available in Israel. So we are currently making these maps using climate models, which isn't really how it's supposed to be done. We would much prefer to have some field data, some long-term field data. So if anybody knows about it, please let us know. That would be a tremendous help. Another thing that's very different about Israel is the 3,500 years of intense human habitation and just tens of thousands of archaeological sites. And so widespread anthropogenic influence on the soils of Israel. And some of these pictures are, well, these pictures are from Danny Itkin's PhD dissertation where he's looking at terrace soils. And I found, that was one of the things I found really amazing being over in Israel is you look at a hill slope that seems natural, and the US would, probably be pretty natural. But the vast majority of them have at some point in human history been terraced, which is a dramatic effect on soils. It has to be accounted for in order to understand the properties. So the timing is pretty remarkable. In my career, there has not been a new soil order added to soil taxonomy, but we are on the cusp of adding a new soil order that may or may not be called artisols. That's still being debated, but it will be reflecting anthropogenic soils. And the timing kind of works out. So Israel may be the first place that's really going to field test this new soil order, which is a pretty cool opportunity. So I've had the opportunity to go over to Israel in 2022 and 2023, check out some soils. I'll just share a few pictures. That was a nice spot along the Mediterranean to check out soils. These are some of they're called vertisols, very high clay content soils. That was one element of Israeli agriculture that is pretty rare in the United States to deal with surface soils with over 40% clay and brings a kind of a new set of challenges and problems. And I won't go into details on these things, but they're pretty amazing soils out there. I look forward to getting to know them better. Part of the story, I was actually supposed to do a 6-week Fulbright in Israel this past year, November, December. Obvious reasons I wasn't able to do that. So that trip has been postponed to 2024. So I'm looking forward to doing that. It's been a significant delay on the project, but is what it is. But right, so I'll be over there primarily to do field work, data collection, to resolve uncertainties in soil classification and the boundaries of that national scale map, but also ideally to collaborate with Israelis, anybody, right? Soil science, and not just soil scientists, any scientists. I'm hopeful that I will, be able to do some extensions of the Global FEWture Alliance while I'm over there. So just put it on our calendars so we can hopefully do some things together while I'm in country. And the last thing I'll mention about this is the database and collaboration component of it. So when I spoke about this at the conference in Israel, it's kind of a little embarrassing that Israel doesn't have a soil survey. Most countries kind of at the level of Israel in terms of industrialization and modernization have one, and there's some reasons won't go into why they don't. But it's actually also a great opportunity because we're starting from scratch, which is an amazing place to be. And I think there's a lot of potential for innovation that could be really amazing. So this is just some initial thoughts of what we could do with what would be a truly modern relational database. So for example, in the United States, when you go to the Soil Survey database, it's only the Soil Survey data, which is great, very important, but nothing else. So we're wondering, maybe we could go way beyond that. We could include point data. I have my colleague here, Ray Weil, that's been collecting amazing soils data for a very long time. There's no place in the US Soil Survey to put those data, but why not? Why couldn't we collect those data and share that data with the users? Also, I work with remote sensors, and it's remarkable the kind of near surface and surface data they're collecting. Why can't that be part of the soil inventory? Photos. We talk about education. Frankly, some of the names we use for soils are a little hard for people to wrap their head around. Why not have images part of our soil survey? And maybe the most interesting one is dynamic soil properties. So the US Soil Survey is relatively static. It is updated, but the properties you're looking at are not properties that change over time. Would it be possible to make it a dynamic soil survey that's actually looking at changes in water content and organic matter content, showing the areas of soil degradation and soil improvement? These are all things that are not done in the US Soil Survey that, I don't know, maybe we could do that in Israel as a test case of what a modern soil survey could possibly look like. So lots of opportunities for collaboration, either if you know someone that might want to contribute data, besides the traditional soil survey data. Now is kind of the time, as we're just in the very early stages of figuring out what this is going to look like, to figure out how to accommodate different data sets, and also data usage. If you have any potential usage for data, now's the time to kind of make sure we build our database in a way that can serve users. So with that, I'll just mention quickly another project that I'm in the very early stages of developing a collaboration with some Israeli soil scientists at the Ministry of Agriculture in the precision sustainable ag space. So it's another area I work in, not just soil survey. Just wanted to mention that while I was here. So I'll wrap it up there. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Needelman. Next up is Lincoln Smith, who is the founder, designer, and instructor at Forested, a 10-acre experimental forest garden site in Bowie, Maryland. He's a passionate forest gardener who views people as integral components of the forest ecosystem. Lincoln and his team explore and implement forest gardening methods to yield nutritious food and restore ecosystems. And may I add that Lincoln is the designer of the Hyattsville food forests, who are in a nascent collaboration with the Global Future Alliance.
Yeah, I'm based just about 20 minutes down 193 from here, so love to have you visit if anybody is so inclined. I've been spending the last 10 or 12 years creating forest gardens, and a growing part of what I get to do is create public urban food forests, which can be a part of the urban environment. As we live in cities, let's see if I can advance the slide here. There it is. So we lack a certain amount of ecosystem function, and also that connection, that immediate connection of people to their food. And in some parts of the city, obviously, a lack of access to fresh food. So while forest gardens and urban agriculture as a whole aren't going to completely feed all the people in the city, I think that it's a very important component to bring back into our urban fabric to restore ecosystem function and create, reestablish that connection of people with their food. Sustainable agriculture, I think in the forested regions of the world, this is a temperate forest where we live. That is the type of ecosystem that we are. So sustainable agriculture should always reference that if possible, and it has to be part of the picture, because a truly thriving ecosystem, the most sustainable form of land management, if you will, in this part of the world is forest. So the question that forest gardening is asking, or food forest is asking, is can we produce a large amount of food for people in a way that works like the forest or restores a healthy forest ecosystem? It's a difficult thing to do. It's pretty different from the way that we grow most of our food, but a lot of cultures in history, as there's increasing evidence to show, have done this. There's been an article in the last couple of years, for example, where they found evidence of the forest agriculture that was going on in the Pacific Northwest, where you can still see heightened biodiversity of the plant community in this section of British Columbia where people were managing the forest for their food, even though those people were forcibly removed from that landscape more than 100 years ago. The biodiversity is still higher there from their participation in that ecosystem. And this is true throughout wherever people were living in forested ecosystems to one extent or another, I think. So you hear a few different words used. Food forest seems to be preferred in this part of the world where you're trying to create a forest that feeds people. And it is an important part of, like many of you may have grown up where you can walk out into the landscape and interact with the forest, but if we don't create these environments intentionally in the city, the kids growing up there will not have that experience. And so I think it's important on a number of fronts, but one of them being that so if we want to protect and restore the forest and have people benefit from what healthy forests can provide, which obviously includes clean water and sequestering carbon and providing wildlife habitat, moderating the climate, all kinds of things. There is something that's even more intimate and immediate about actually harvesting from that landscape, from that forested landscape, as opposed to the beneficial but more passive just hiking around in the forest and observing that it's beautiful. If you're actually deriving food from there, helping take care of it, being an integral part of it, I think that I've seen can lead people to value the forest even more. An example is right here in Bowie, where I've been leasing this 10 acres of former cornfield that we're making into a forest and a section of forest for the last 10 years. It's from a church that owns this land. And the church, once in a while, they own about 80 acres. I have about 10 of it leased. And once in a while, the church raises the question, should we sell this land, raise some money, build housing to raise money for, to better endow the school, which is a reasonable question. Every piece of land ultimately wants to turn into houses around here, apparently. But the members of the church, when they're surveyed about this, now they'll say, well, if you have to, you can sell some of that land, but please save the forest garden if you can. Because the people in that church community at one time or another, they've come to one of the chef dinners that's out there, or they've walked their dogs, or they've enjoyed the fruit there. So that connection to the forest in that sense, I think helps people appreciate it more and realize how connected they are to it. So we spend a lot of time feeding. We grow just about every different type of berry. We do emphasize native plants, but we'll grow just about anything that may be useful as a food around here. We try it out on kids and see what they like the best. But a forest garden includes much more than just the crops that you're going to harvest. It also includes diversity to support insect and wildlife habitat. And I could say a lot about this, but I think it's important to try to introduce these elements, and that gives the people participating in urban spaces a chance to connect with that aspect of the landscape too. So it's a food producing landscape, but it includes some things that people do not harvest. Winterberry holly is an example of that. Like, that's not an edible berry for people, but it's an important native winter bird food. And having those birds around is beneficial to the system as a whole. Like, the forest, part of what makes it work without very much input from people is its diversity. So you have a wide variety of different habitat elements for the different creatures that live there, and that in turn can have some benefits for the crops that we want to harvest. In the landscape in Bowie, we've seen, for example, those indigo buntings come back into the landscape since we started the project, and all of these creatures, they eat a certain amount of insects and can, over time, reduce the likelihood that you will have an explosion of a pest population of one kind or another. In contrast to what Dr. Needelman was mentioning, this is not precision agriculture. It is very much trying to synthesize what forest ecologists and agronomists have found, and those two don't talk very much, talking about silos. But I think it's a very important question. The forest around here does work. People have derived their living from it in the past when they didn't have the option of importing food or tilling the ground to the extent that we do nowadays. So forest gardening is not going to feed the world tomorrow, but I think that introducing these spaces into our urban areas does create very important connections and help form the minds and the experiences through that immediacy of putting a berry in your mouth or observing food. That said, it's not always a panacea. This is my son having and I see a lot of these type of reactions when you try to give kids food. This is my daughter drew this after we had a volunteer planting day at one of these sites. That was her experience of it. So I didn't want to leave you with the idea that this is all rosy, but we do have a lot of success with it. And just as in concluding on the practical sense, this is definitely a local leadership is important. So the team in Hyattsville had a vision for creating food forest parks as part of the urban landscape. When you're designing these spaces, obviously they have to include considerations beyond the wildlife diversity in the food. They have to be, this was an area where there's a certain amount of security questions, so we tried to design sight lines and space and things like that. And they do take a while to grow up, but over time, you start to finally get some produce out of these spaces. It's not an instant return, but in the long term, food forests can be very productive. Shady areas are good places to grow mushrooms. You can see the Capitol Hill Montessori, that's over by Union Station. We put in these beds of wine taps in the fall, and then by spring, that spring, they harvested hundreds of pounds from this little shady side of the building there, and the students sold mushrooms to parents at pickup time. Urban environment, often you have to kind of it is sometimes crowded. So we were given a chance to do a forest garden or a food forest at Langley Elementary School. And it was going to be this tiny little 6-foot strip in the shade of the building. But we turned around and we saw this huge sort of erosive bank between the elementary school and the rec center next door. And we talked about it. And eventually we decided that it was going to take a lot of site work before we could even get started with the gardening part. But we gained permission. We used a lot of these urban logs that urban forestry department cuts down when they need to remove a street tree to terrace up the slope and get it turned into a little food forest oasis. And it's now producing a good amount of fruit and strawberries, and both the rec center community and the school community enjoy that space. This one we managed to find, a lot of these school landscapes are incredibly barren looking. If it's all sports field, but the sports, we talked to them and we realized like, oh, there's actually a lot of space that isn't needed by the soccer field where we can put this forest garden. So yeah, I hope you'll come down and visit us in Bowie if you're ever interested, or you can contact me at this website and I can point you to any number of spots if you're interested around the DC area. Thanks.
Our next presentation is a duet with Dr. Tomer Malchi, who is the co-founder and CEO of CultivAid. He has a PhD in soil and water science from Hebrew University. For the past decade, Tomer has been leading innovative agricultural initiatives in East Africa. And David Zukerman is CultivAid's country director in Tanzania. David has been on the ground for 3 years to establish farms, training programs, and new projects. He's an expert agronomist with a passion for sustainable development. Gentlemen.
I just want to say first of all, thank you to everyone at GMD, Amy and Heidi, everyone down there. Thank you for organizing and doing a great job. It's great to have so many people here. And we thought a lot about what we wanted to share, because we have a lot to share, but we wanted to really talk about one of the models that we're implementing that looks at what we term the holy triangle. I also want to say, just because she's here, Water for Mercy is one of our partners, Nermeen. Nermeen, just raise your hand. That's Nermeen. She's with us. She's a great partner. She's been with us for about 5 years, so she's definitely a big part of this program. I want to move this thing. What am I doing to move it? There you go. Okay. So CultivAid, for people who don't know, and I'm sure most of you have never heard of us, we're a Israeli technical organization that really specializes in agriculture and water. We look at how to take Israeli technology, Israeli knowledge, and start having it being implemented in countries where we work, which today is mostly Ethiopia, Tanzania, Kenya. We work a little bit in Morocco, a little bit in Uganda, and we're looking at opening up something in Zambia. But what's important for me is these pictures are from the field. This is usually not what you think about when you think about African agriculture, but this is what we see. And this is what the future in Africa really looks like. So we're looking at a different paradigm, we're looking at different images and what most people will often be used to. And part of the work we do is really looking at how do we scale up what works in Israel. Israel is not a model for any African country. We have a very different context than anyone else, but there's a lot of things to learn from Israel. And some of the dry facts really is that Israel is a very small country. We're 22,000 square kilometers, about half of which is desert. So you see everything below that. See I put a little precipitation map just to show half of Israel, everything 300 below is pretty much desert. But still, we are able to be number one, or not number one, but high up in the agricultural export for a lot of different commodities. Dates, we are number one. Avocado, which is sometimes to me surprising if you think about it, we're number 11. A small little country can be number 11 where there's a lot of competition, a lot of producers, olive oil, and I can list on and on different crops that we specialize in and export around the world. And you know, we ask what's so special about Israel? Why does this small little country, how is it able to become such a huge exporter? And when you compare this amount of land, just for comparison, you know, Tanzania has almost 1 million square kilometers. Nepal, 150,000 square kilometers. Maryland, 32,000 square kilometers. So just to understand how small this country really is, and to be such a big agricultural player. And the Israeli experience, what we look at really is the use of innovative technologies, knowledge, and we try to really understand what of this whole system could be transported outwards. And we look at the yields that we're talking about is really key to understanding Israel's agriculture. The average production of avocado is about 10 tons per hectare. In Israel, our average is around 20. Dates, if it's 8 tons per hectare in average yield, we produce around 11. And even, you know, things like related to livestock, milk, the average milk per cow per day is around 28 liters per cow per day, and we're producing over 50. Okay, so there's something here about efficiency, precision, our ability to extract high yields that we say, what is this ability? Where does it come from? And what me and many of Israeli experts will often point you to is what we call the holy triangle. Okay, it's a relationship between 3 major factors: research and development, extension, and market. And you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. You have research being done in places like universities or extension centers. You have an extension team going out, putting this technology to work, providing feedback back to the R&D, and you have the market, which plays a critical role in both funding R&D and also make sure that the inputs are there, processing. So all of these 3 players have to play together. And it seems very reasonable and very rational that they would have a strong relationship. What we see in most countries where we work, that this relationship does not exist. The research does one thing, they have no idea what's happening with farmers. The extension is maybe 1 extension agent per 1,000 farmers, and the system just does not work, right? In Israel, just to give you an idea of what we're looking at, we have about 10 R&D farms per each, 10 R&D farms in Israel, 1 for each eco-region. These farms really demonstrate, validate, and are responsible for the adaptation of technologies, and they produce research protocols, they produce knowledge. They're knowledge hubs for farmers, okay? The extension part is really looking at how do you create high quality agronomists who can then go out to farmers, provide advisory service, and make sure that the production that's being produced is of high quality, they get sold, that the farmers are making money. And that's that real aim at the end of the extension team, is to make sure that farmers are making money. But the extension doesn't only work with farmers. In Israel, the extension also works with the universities. They go to the processors, they go to the industry, and the extension is not limited to just farmers, which is often the case in the countries where we work. And the last part is really the market. And this is the importance of the private sector. And in Israel, the private sector is very important. It's not only a classical private sector. What we have a lot of times is the organization of farmers who then own a big piece of the private sector, and then the profits from, let's say, selling the produce and exporting it is rolled back into the farmer's hands. And this is very, very important in enabling economies of scale and for farmers to understand that they're not working by themselves, but rather as part of a bigger group. We also have a lot more coordination in our economic system, in our agricultural system, and marketing boards, which help to coordinate the entire system. With that, I'm going to turn it over to David, who's going to take this concept and show you how we're implementing it in the field.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Tomer. So I will show you a bunch of pictures, and as Tomer said, it's mostly to show you how these concepts and ideas are being manifested in day-to-day activities in the farm. One thing that I want to point out is that it might be obvious for many of us, but we cannot expect for the end user of the innovation to be the one who is in charge of pushing the innovation forward. And this is why we will start our imaginary tour in the Holy Triangle in the R&D angle, which is the high-tech side. And this is where we are basically introducing new varieties, methods, and technologies. We do validation and examination of the data, all to make sure that it has also an economical feasibility. And after adjustment of the working methods to a replicable protocol, we can provide it to the farmers and then for those methods to be adopted. The second angle in the triangle is the extension. But before we go to the extension, I will explain a little bit about the agri-cluster term or approach that we also put into action. And this is basically aggregating groups of farmers that share similar characteristics, such as market, crops, or geographical location. And then by aggregating them, we're basically enhancing their market strength and their ability to react and to be flexible for different forces in economy and where they're working in the agricultural climate. And by those extension agents, basically the knowledge being generated in the high-tech site is being disseminated at the local community. Now to share just a short case study, some of you may know, but fruit trees, they're all being grafted, and this is something that is common also in Tanzania. And the idea is that by taking a sign of a desired variety, we are propagating it on a rootstock. Now, the thing is that we are taking the sign from a mature tree, what is basically allowing the tree to produce fruits from day one, right? Because it doesn't have a juvenile period where it cannot produce any fruits. Now, for the common farmer, seems like a great hack because it can really just starting to harvest fruits from the first year of the production or the growth. But what we saw that after a few years, the tree, in this case is grapes. We found it also on mango and avocado. And the tree has damages that are all originated from the fact that the tree was producing fruits that are highly demanding of nutritious and other resources that the tree has, and they are putting it into the fruits. So what our agronomists are doing in the high-tech site is they are basically cutting the flowers from the trees, and they are now seeing the impact that it has on the tree's growth after 2 or 3 years. So that our trees in the farm are much bigger than other trees that you can see in the farmers in Tanzania. And has to do a lot because of this activity. So now today, our agronomists can go to the farmer's plot and basically convince them to do the same. And in the Grape project, which is actually a part of the FEWture Alliance, our team had gone and surveyed more than 300 farmers and identified many intervention points like this to optimize the growth of whatever they're growing, basically. The third angle is the market. Now we know that market needs stability and assurance, what will enhance the investment. So we are working on strengthening the relationship between the vineries and the farmers. So the vineries can come with demand to the farmers, and the farmers can get assurance of selling the produce. To summarize, I want to introduce you to our local agronomist team in Tanzania that basically they are the sustainable infrastructure of the agricultural development in Tanzania as we see it today. And hopefully this team will increase more and more. So I am hoping that I was able to emphasize on the how CultivAid is basically emphasizing the Israeli model and how we are able to connect universities and to the market, to knowledge of the extension agents, and in the end, to the farmer. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David and Tomer. Next up is Jonathan Leiman, who works for the Maryland Department of Environment's Water Quality Modeling Division. He provides assistance to Maryland's jurisdictions on environmental rules that govern total maximum daily load model implementation.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. I guess aside from me, I think Dr. Tien is the only other regulator who's been in the room today. So no EPA folks. So I'm going to try to stay concise and also try to wake us up a little bit and sort of root us in the reality, especially here in a lot of discussions about, markets and what those mean for driving what's possible or not. For my role, I'm supposed to look out primarily for public health. My day-to-day job, I'm reviewing stormwater plans for the Interstate 95 corridor mostly, which is a lot of very suburbanized, subdivided areas within the state. So we heard a lot about temperate forests and those resources and how to reconstruct those or make some kind of synthetic version of those to move water along. I'd also say one thing I'm not going to talk about because it's a whole conference in and of itself is the Chesapeake Bay. A lot of my work is an offshoot of that. But the federal program, the U.S. government has set up in the Chesapeake Bay program, again, is a whole conference within and of itself. You could spend a week talking about all the different offices and individuals who contribute to try to restore water quality in the Bay. It's a tremendous resource. It's of national importance for a number of reasons. So we're just going to be talking about a very small slice of that here. And also, I work for the citizens of Maryland, so I'm going to try to stay as local in my presentation of this question as possible. And again, try to stay concise and save time for discussion. My program is within the Water and Science Administration, and we handle pretty much these three things. Total maximum daily load is a term in the Clean Water Act, which again could be a multi-week conference on the ins and outs and all the different laws that are compartments of the Clean Water Act. But one is this total maximum daily load for folks who aren't familiar with it. And we also do water and sewer plan review, which are particular requirements that are specific to the state of Maryland. That are in our state-based regulations. And then where I sit is in the Water Quality Modeling Division. Our work is becoming increasingly diverse, and we're being asked to do more and more complex things, not just with stormwater and hydrology and pollutant movements across the landscape, but also contributing to the development of things like permits, both for dredging and discharge, and sort of we span the entire Water and Science Administration. So it's good to be in a room full of people who are interested in the FEW Nexus. Again, a TMDL is a water quality-based habitat model. You can think of it kind of as a starting point for understanding biological health. Particularly, it's built on indices for biotic integrity for macroinvertebrates and fisheries. And then, our program, because we're needing to expand beyond that traditional development of that type of model, we're needing to find more innovative and willing partners to work together. So I'm very happy that university has had us, and Amy and others have invited us to be part of this, because my initial question is, what role am I supposed to be playing in the development of markets? It's something that the department's worked through before, particularly with like on-site disposal and keeping nitrogen in place, again, for those larger Chesapeake Bay models. But when we look at overlapping local management problems, what does that look like? Because I think in a lot of times we may find that stormwater is a problem across the world. It's not just unique to Maryland. So how do we utilize that resource in terms of its constituents and also the energy that's found within the movement of water across the landscape? So I drafted this as kind of the opportunity I see with Jim George, who isn't here today, but who's been the lead for the last number of years on water reuse in Maryland. But basically what is it saying is that stormwater is very expensive. It's a form of heavily invested in infrastructure in the state. It's one that's now in its sort of 5th or 6th iteration, if you're looking this in permit terms. And it's one that if it's not maintained and operated properly, it's not going to do what it's supposed to do. We heard numerous conversations today about, flash flooding and those types of things that are problems that are not going away. Also, we have numerous counties that were just under drought watches throughout the fall. So the availability of water is a problem, as well as its quality. But I think the main question that we need to ask as a group, at least if we're talking about developing local models for pollution, is what are those endpoints for those models? Are you shifting, let's say, a stormwater resource and putting that in an area to be utilized for some sort of agricultural reservoir, or are you shifting that to some place to make an urban garden? Because the model endpoint is going to be very different for those, and the state is really the entity that's in charge of making sure that endpoint is demarcated and delineated. And the components within that model are sort of agreed upon between stakeholders. As of now, if you open up the Clean Water Act, you'll see water supply. Again, we talked about just now fish and macroinvertebrate biological indices, and then also human health when it comes to full body contact. If we have beaches where we have swimming going on both at irregular times and then throughout the summer. So each one of those 3 bins presents a slightly different endpoint. But if you're going to then expand to agricultural uses or for emergency fire suppression, for example, the potential uses of stormwater, depending on its volume and when it's available, vary. But we first need to look at sort of what are we trying to manage for. So I think that's one of the main things we're hoping to achieve with this collaboration and working with the university is say, what's the character of this stormwater we're getting? We can generally say if it's downstream of 100% ag, it'll maybe be of a certain quality. If it's within the limits of Baltimore City, it may be of another type of quality, and therefore it has a certain specific application. We should be designing that model to push it towards. So kind of in review, TMDL, it's a habitat model. It's just a starting point. A lot of times people think the TMDL is a be-all, end-all for how a river or a lake or a reservoir is supposed to be managed. It is definitely not. Maryland developed a number of TMDLs over a very short period of time, and the utility of those models is only as good as those who are willing to take it off the shelf and try to create an implementation version of that. And just some unsolicited advice, I'd say for, again, try to be not provocative, but for anybody doing research and wanting for it to have staying power and have applications long-term, particularly in a place like Maryland, seek data that's generated due to regulations. Sometimes if we get a grant, and I've been a part of this, the money comes in, we get, maybe at most 5 years worth of really good data, and then the money's gone. But if we look at the regulatory staying power of information that's generated that way, it's the law for that information to exist. And therefore, when you're building that model, you may not have, 50 variables you want, but you'll at least have that long-term period of which you're understanding that water resource. So if there's any follow-up, we're very interested in collaborating with folks. We're a modeling program. We've got about 5 full-time modelers who work on bacteria, toxics, sediment, nutrients. And then, my focus is working with our stormwater program on review of plans that, again, are mostly driven by development within the Interstate 95 and I-70 corridor. So Thank you all for having me, and yeah, look forward to more discussion.
Thank you, Jonathan. And our last speaker in this robust panel of session 3 is Yuval Ziv, Hebrew University. So additionally, he's the founder and CEO of WaterComms, a social impact startup dedicated to enhancing water system functionality in Kenya by a minimum of 50 days per year. In his roles, Yuval combines expertise in urban planning with a commitment to addressing water-related challenges in Kenya.
So maybe until it will come up, I will also say thank you for the University of Maryland, for you personally, Amy, and of course to Suana and Heidi and Maurice. So thank you all very much. It's very nice to be here, and hospitality is really great. So indeed, and also to mention Yael Michel, who sent me over to here, and I really appreciate that, from the Hebrew University Soil and Water Department. Now, I will try to share with you the story of a startup that I founded. So far, it has not been implemented in a big scale because of fundraising. I must to make this a spoiler, but the lessons are very much relevant, and maybe one day with the FEWture Alliance, it will somehow will pick it up. And then 3 projects that now taking place in the Hebrew University. So I want to give you the contact details, and if anybody in this room want to make contact with one of them, please approach me. So I'll start with WaterComms, that stands for Water Communities. So the concept is about creating a community-based water sector network to connect between all the players, and especially to create trust between all the agents. And I will share with you the main lessons of the 2019 pilot we have made in Kenya. Kenya is not part of the alliance, but it's not far away from Tanzania, of course, and it's very relevant as well. So here are some data about why is it so hard to maintain a water system. Not why, but a little bit of data shows it is so hard to maintain a water system. So 100 days a year, almost 1/3 of the time, most systems are malfunction. So it's a lot of time to be malfunction, and then people have to seek for other solutions for the water. 50% of urban dwellers do not have really safely managed drinking water. It takes too much time to get the right spare parts for your water system in case of failure. And many families take too much money on their water needs, more than 10% usually, so it's a lot. And now, why is it so hard to properly maintain a water system? So we are lacking technicians who are well skilled to their job. This sounds very simple, but it's a hard problem. And then there is no reliable information about where you take your technician from, to call the technician that will be reliable and will come with the right tools and do the job correctly. There are a lot of low quality imitations and parts that people are using. And of course, the cheap is mostly the most expensive. This is what we say in Hebrew. And there is a broken trust, which to my opinion, at last is the most big problem. When people earn little, they fear about their money, and they are very suspicious about conmen and stuff like that. So the trust is really low. These are some examples of water systems that you can find in Kenya. So you can see that we have grid connections. On the upper left side is origin of the grid, where they take the water from the river and treat it. You can see a spring. People are regarding springs as a high quality water source for the living. You can see shallow well that is being tapped by a hand pump. You can see another hand pump here. You can see water storage also related to the grid. Even if you are connected to the grid, it is not 24/7, and therefore you have to store water on your roof and to take care of it personally. And then you can see a rainwater harvesting system that was mentioned by Rachel. And personally, I went to see several rainwater harvesting systems in Kenya, and it was really interesting. And shallow wells can be operated manually, but also with a submersible pump electrically. And now, why it is slow to improve, like to take advanced water technologies and to implement them correctly, it is really hard. And this is because it is hard to find those high quality technicians and to make the connections with them and to train them on new technologies. Where are they? How can you find them? To network with reputable distributors, those who have shops for equipment, this is also hard. Where do you find them and how do you reach them? To have reliable data about where are the water systems, what are their technologies, what are their needs. It is also another challenge. And to do effective marketing. How do you know if this community over there needs this kind of a pump or a pipeline or whatever? You need to know what are their needs. And now this is a very important slide. These are the main players in this field in less developed places. So you find the water system owners. They might usually, in many cases, they are schools. Schools is a very good origin for water in a community. They need water for their hundreds or thousands of students. Landlords who have apartments, communities like a CBO, community-based organization might be a good example of that. And their role is to daily operate the water systems, to contact the technicians when there is a failure. And usually they will buy themselves the spare parts because of the trust issue. They will not give their money to somebody else to buy for them. And this is why they need the information as well. The water technicians are plumbers on all levels of knowledge. They might be qualified officially or less officially, and they will fix the water system issues, and they will install the equipment. Often they are employed by the spare parts suppliers. You can imagine a small shop, is small or big, with 100 to several hundreds of items on the stock. And they're selling the parts, they're selling the pumps, they're importing from the big cities like Nairobi in Kenya, and they bring it, in some cases, even with the bus to their shops in the smaller cities. And then they are distributing that and they're employing the technicians. Yeah, so this is their part. Now, our model has been to combine the human contact, which is really important, with the simple technology. The technology should have been a marketplace where people are getting reliable contact to the water technicians and the spare parts suppliers. So you see the app illustration where a technician can have a business profile like an Uber or like an Airbnb. He can chat and bill his work with the clients, as well as the spare part suppliers can give prices for pieces of different items. And there is a data reporting tool, which is really important. If a technician reach a water system, he can pinpoint where is this system, and later on you have the statistics about the system to your usage. And the field agent interface, the field agent I will show in the next slide is our human contact in the field. Because we want to create trust and reliability and reputation, you have to find somebody that will be with a face and knowledgeable and to the community and from the community and speak the local language. So they're controlling they're like a franchisee, controlling the activity on the ground, and they can monitor where are the water systems, where are the technicians, send the information, receive it, and handle the complete situation. This is the photo of the team that we had in our 2019 minimum viable product pilot. This is a bit deeper about the field agent. How much time do I have? I don't want to pass. How much? Okay, so I'll try to make it a bit faster. So field agents are, as I said that before, they have to manage their work on the ground, and we understood that because so many people have asked us, where is your office? And I was surprised, why do you need to ask me about an office where is an online service? Because people want to know that you are real, you are not a tricker or a con man. You have, it has to be frontal. This is the lesson. This is the simple illustration of the technology. Different interfaces, a person can call, a person can send an SMS or use the app. and can approach the field agent on the field, but the data is being stored in a wise manner, so we can use it later on to all these intersections and to advance the water sector to new frontiers, I would say. This is the business model. It has two parts. It should have been a business and not an NGO. It should have started with simple fees, like seriousness fees from the technicians and from the spare part suppliers. And to continue after you gather enough data, you can serve water companies who want to train the right technicians. You can serve the government who want to implement a project and needs the distributors, and you can serve big NGOs that want to do projects in the field. And you use the data to provide them with what they need. And of course, as I mentioned, also the marketing to market pinpoint equipment like a filter maybe. And this is the social impact part. It has short-term effects and long-term effects around public health, economy, and environment. They are pretty obvious, like to reduce exposure to unsafe drinking water simply by managing the water correctly. I need to move on because I want to show the Hebrew University projects. And the major lessons from the pilot, I would say, first was the thing about frontal acceptance and connection from the community. This is the most important one. Marketing is also something to learn how you do it. For example, we went to assemblies of neighborhoods. You need to learn how to do it and speak with the people. And on the other side, to go to the radio station and speak, and to advertise or to do it on Facebook. And of course, to be like David is all 3 years in Tanzania, you have to be there on the ground. It helps the trust building and it helps the fundraising, which in our case was a hard issue. Now about the university projects, and please, if it's relevant to you, take a picture of that and contact the different researchers directly. So this is the research of Ariel Aviram. He's a PhD candidate. He's also active in Tanzania. And he is trying to implement the red lines approach to a very local settings. So to balance between the usage of water, energy, food with the needs of the community, assuming that you have to find a buffer zone to not to cross the red line and to harm the situation in your settings, but you also have to use the resources in order to make life. So if you want to contact Ariel, please be my guest. The second one is about PFAS, which probably in the US you know about it. It's different molecules of carbon and other particles which you can find in all these products, and they are very soluble, and therefore you find them in the water and they accumulate in the human body, and it's really hard to take them out of the water, especially when the chain is short. And Muhammad and Yael Michel, who is an instructor in his PhD, they found a way to take to identify even very small amounts of PFAS and to take them out of the water in the special approach. Again, if you want to approach Muhammad, be my guest, and you can also ask me and I'll put you in connection. The last one, which I asked Yael to add, Amy, and I think it's really relevant, is about the entrepreneurial side of stuff. In the Hebrew University in Givat Ram, which is not the agricultural campus, there is an accelerator and incubator dealing with biotech, and dealing among the biotech, there is food tech, agriculture, environment, and it is really successful because it has a very good edge. It allows the students, or even not the students of the Hebrew University who are part of the program, to approach all the infrastructural units and labs and human capital in the Givat Ram campus and the Hebrew University, IP-free. And then you see very interesting companies are growing. Some of them are relevant for rural and for developing settings. Like, for example, Diptera, or they produce a population of mosquitoes who cannot multiply. And then when they take them outside, it lowers the population of harmful mosquitoes. and other examples that you can look in the website. And again, if you want to ask me about it, I'll be happy to do that. And I think also that it might give interesting direction to think about for the Alliance, how you enter the entrepreneurial, how do you combine entrepreneurs and even entrepreneurs from the developing countries with the knowledge and with the research that you have in the universities. And that's it from my part.